Hello and welcome to another fantastic audio tutorial. My name is Dave Bode, bringing you this tutorial exclusively for Audio.tutsplus.com. In this tutorial, we are going to talk about how to beef up some real live acoustic guitars. We're going to take a look at a demo here that I put together that shows one way to do this. Now, in this situation here, what I've done is I've recorded one track of real acoustic guitar. In a couple of different styles. We got a 6/8 thing going on, and here's a quicker 4/4. It's just a single mono track, nothing really too special about it. And then you see a couple of other things down here. Now, what I've done here to beef this up is I've used a guitar sample library to basically double what I was playing on a real acoustic guitar. Same thing over here. It doesn't sound perfectly human, but it's pretty close. And what I use to do this is a really simple acoustic guitar library made by WavesFactory called StrumGTR Acoustic. And what this is major and minor chords, upstrokes and downstrokes, played with a steel 6-string guitar with a pick, and that's it. It's just majors and minors. And so you'd think that may be pretty limited, but there's a lot of stuff that you can use it for. And the really cool thing about this library here is that it's really cheap. It's 9.95 euros. And if you're in the United States, where I am, that's about $13.19 at the current exchange rate. And a couple things that I like about this. One, 5 velocity layers. And for each one of those, and each chord, there are 4 round robins. And they've done upstrokes and downstrokes with those 5 velocity layers and 4 round robins on all of the chords. And the way that they've done it is that the lower velocities kind of play the strings associated with strumming. And if you're not a guitar player, basically, if you are kind of strumming quieter on a full chord, you tend to hit only certain notes. So if you're doing downstrokes, usually you're going to hit the lower 3 strings. So the E, the A, and the D string. And if you're doing upstrokes at lower velocities, or less intense strumming, you tend to hit the upper strings, the E, B, and G strings. And that's how they've sampled this library. Now, the way this particular library lays out is in this octave right here, between this C and this B natural, you have minor downstrokes. These are velocity sensitive. Mod wheel doesn't do anything. And then in the next octave down, right here, you have major downstrokes. Then the next octave down, you have minor upstrokes. And then the next octave down, you have major upstrokes. So basically, your minor and major octaves are separated by 1 octave. So we have major, C major here, downstroke and upstroke. And so it's somewhat intuitive to play like that, except when you have to jump from major to minor, there's kind of an octave jump that you have to do, but it's really not a big deal. And then up here, we have a couple of little effect things that you can add to kind of increase the realism. We have, this is an open upstroke, so these are the strings. And you can see if you use a light velocity, it's just the top 3 strings. If you use a low velocity here on the downstroke open notes, just the bottom 3 strings. And we have an upstroke mute, and we have a downstroke mute. Then we have kind of an open mute strum there. Short fret noise, and a longer fret noise. Those are pretty quiet there. So you can use these to kind of shape the chords and put on top of the chords to kind of increase the realism. And even the chords, if you play them really short, kind of work like a mute as well, because you get that first kind of pick bite of the strings. So if you're playing around with this, you'll figure out really quick that this particular library is not the easiest one to play. It takes a little bit of finessing. So if you're doing, say, just a major strum here, and if you think how a guitar player strums, if you want to go jing, 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 that's going to be down, down, up, down, up, jing, 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 jing. So that's the rhythm that we want to play, right? So if I just play it without the sustain pedal, we get this, which is a very kind of muted thing. Maybe that's not what you want, though. Maybe you want it to sound more open. That's kind of hard to play because you need to basically fire the second downstroke immediately as you release, and that's essentially impossible to do because you have to release the key in order to strike it again. You can get it pretty close, but if you use a sustain pedal, you can kind of blend those together. Occasionally you get a little bit of phasiness if you hold the sustain pedal down too long, but it can give you an idea of how you might want to go about kind of programming this. What I usually do is this. Sometimes you'll come up with rhythms that will work without messing around with this at all. But sometimes you are trying to match something, like, for instance, this rhythm right here. Which may require a little bit more kind of programming. The way this is played, that's down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. And the accents are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's pretty simple, right? So let's check out how to go about creating something with this plugin that sounds pretty close. Now this is kind of hard to see because remember the downstrokes and upstrokes are separated by octaves. So if we look here at the start, you can see that everything's pushed forward a little bit, but for now I will reset it here in Reaper. I will select all of these and I will quantize and I will not do the note end. I'll just do 30-second notes. There we go. So you can see exactly how I went about lining this up. Okay, so we have the first chord here. It's a G major. And let me just solo up this guy. Now, I had to do a couple of things that kind of messes with the reality of how a guitar player would play this. So this is bum, 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 bum. 1, 2, and 3, and okay, so that's going to be down, down, up, down, up. And that's basically how it falls here. We're looking at 16th note subdivisions in the grid here. And we have 1, 2, and 3, and. So the first chord here, the first note is accented. Bum, bum. And the rest of these need to be lower in dynamic. Because that's how you play it. Jing, jigga, jigga. And so the rest of these are going to be a little bit less in dynamic. Now, you can see here when the second chord hits, it carries over when this upstroke hits, which kind of makes sense because if you're coming up on a lighter upstroke, you may not hit all of the keys, which means the vibration of the lower notes is going to ring over. the top strings. So I kind of overlap the chords just a little bit. I left this upstroke here kind of overlapping when this downstroke hits, because again, this is a lighter downstroke. So a lighter downstroke is not going to hit all of the notes. So I just kind of left these ringing. And then at the end of this chord, when we move to the next chord, what I did is I left a little bit of overlap. I think I did a 1/64th note overlap here, because without this, they change here. Sounds a little bit robotic. By dragging these out just a little bit, we kind of blur the lines there. It's subtle, but that was the idea. In addition to manipulating these kind of overtones here, so dragging the chords so they kind of overlap, the other thing that I found helpful to do is use the sustain pedal or the hold pedal to blend the chords together as well. You can see here we have two downstrokes, but there is a sustain pedal kind of connecting these. And so let me show you what happens when I take that off. Almost nothing. But I think with it on and clicking it off right before this upstroke, it connects the chords just a little bit better. You can hear right here, I did the same thing. I take that out. It's subtle. It may be a take it or leave it kind of thing. I felt like in this particular example, it kind of melded together a little bit better if I just blended these chords just a hair into one another. Now, occasionally that may fire a chord that causes a little bit of weird phasiness, but I tried to make sure that the second chord here was on a different velocity layer. So even though it's hitting the same notes, it's a different sample. So even the round robin would probably take care of that, but you know, that's occasionally something to watch out for. So you can see there's a couple of kind of finessing things that you have to do in there to make this sound as realistic as possible. Now if you look at the overall dynamics here, you can see that nothing is really super loud. And if we look in the plugin and go into the mapping editor, I think the loudest sample that I'm using is this kind of 3/4. That's like a mezzo forte, a little bit louder than that, I guess. It's not the second loudest, and it's not the loudest. And you can hear what those sound like here. So if I bump this up, that's like a big chord there. And then if we move down in the second velocity area here, and I'll move this over so you can hear, that's still got a lot of bite to it. Down here, it's got a little bit less. And a little bit less. And then the bottom is basically covered by a big hunk of stuff there. So to match the other guitar, I had to use velocities that matched too. And because I didn't, I wasn't beating the guitar part, super, super hard and aggressively, those dynamics matched pretty well. With how I played it, because I wasn't really aggressively picking it. So let's check out this second example here. This is using a kind of faster, more open strumming thing. Hastily recorded, obviously. This is in particular tricky to try and replicate because the chords that I played here are not necessarily available. First chord is just open E. The second chord, in the third chord, and so we only have major and minors to deal with. And plus, the way that I played this is that the E and the B string are ringing out the entire time. And I just kind of move the bottom 4 notes. And I'll mute this other one here, and we'll look at that in a second here. So what I did to try and replicate this as much as possible is I did a little strum cheating, and you can see things are kind of pushed to the left a little bit so that things line up with the acoustic, the live guitar recorded track. Here, you can see I only used the hold pedal at the very end I used a different technique here because the real way you play here on this E chord, jing jigga jigga jing jigga, is down, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. Problem is that the lighter velocity downstrokes are on the lower three notes. That doesn't quite sound right because the way that you play this pattern is that you play the downstrokes on the upper couple of notes. So jing jigga jigga jing jigga jigga jing jigga. That's all on the higher notes, right? Check that out. There's like the initial downstroke, jing jigga jigga, and then for all the other rhythmical stuff, I only used upstrokes because they kind of focus on those upper strings. And then what I did was I just left the downstroke just going here. And I will solo up just this so you can hear how that works. And it ended up to be pretty close. I mean, all the downstrokes, they sound right. All the other rhythmical stuff is pretty close. I mean, it's not perfect. And it's at a pretty light dynamic. We can push it up a little bit more. Or we could even humanize it to some degree. Maybe pull back down. But the best compromise of that is to just leave it down there. Even though it doesn't sound perfect, it's close enough so that when it's blended with the other track in there, it sounds pretty good. And because I had these downstrokes here basically just holding out through all these upstrokes, I really didn't need to use sustain pedal to connect anything together. Now the other thing that I did is I put some fret noises in here. And I also put on the last two 16th notes, which you can see everything is shifted over a little bit, but on the last two 16th notes, I put two strum noises, really, really lightly, just to give it a little bit of that kind of realism. You know, as you're changing the chord, the last two strokes, you'll get a little bit of that kind of muted strumming action in there. They could probably use to come up just a hair, maybe. It's subtle, but it's in there. Also, the fret noises are pretty subtle as well. The real live track definitely has strum noises in it as well. And to help kind of glue this together as well, WavesFactory has another library, acoustic guitar pick. And it's pretty much exactly what you would think. It's basically lightweight picks on every single note chromatically. I don't think there's any velocities in here, but there's two round robin on each one of those. And there's some hammer-ons and some muted notes as well. So there's some key switches in there. But basically, all I used this for was to do some arpeggios. And for that, it works super, super well. And to program these arpeggios, it's the same kind of thing. You know, when you're working with a library, you really have to work within the limits of the library, but also consider how a real life instrument is played. And if you're playing one of these kind of sweep arpeggios on a real guitar, none of the notes are going to strike at exactly the same time. It's not like a chord where you're really hammering it. You're kind of dragging the pick. And so when you kind of play it down on a keyboard, sometimes you can get some notes that tend to fire pretty close together. And that's pretty unrealistic sounding. So what I did is I went back through all of the notes that I played and just made sure that it had a real nice kind of taper here. It's almost like an exponential curve. And I also made sure that the velocities were pretty in check. I made this little curve here. Even though these notes don't have different velocity layers, they are mapped so that lower velocity ranges will be lower in volume. And so that was kind of the idea, is that it starts a little bit softer and it kind of goes up, but everything's generally at the same dynamic. You know, there's not a big difference in dynamic. And I think that And I also played the chords like you can voice them on a real guitar. So root, fifth, root, third, fifth, root, in order from lowest to highest. You know, same thing with these chords here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so just those small, simple ideas really help to add to the realism. And right here is an example of my first kind of mock-up of that guitar part. And here I use the actual strumming like you would do it in real life. So down, down, up, down, up. It's alternating guitar strokes. And listen to the difference. It sounds a little bit schizophrenic because those lighter velocity downstrokes are on the lower strings, and that just doesn't work because that's not how you play this particular pattern. So I basically just took all those, redrew them all here, and it works out much better there. So I hope that's helpful for you, even though it's a very simple, just major and minor with round robins and, you know, different velocity layers with some effects and other stuff in there. You know, it's not like a big mega library, but it can be really effective. Sounds a lot better in stereo. If you're doing a mono mix of those, you definitely have to EQ them a little bit different, or maybe just pick one, probably the real acoustic guitar, because when they're both panned to center, it doesn't really work. It's a little bit too busy and the rhythms aren't quite perfect. I hope those tips and tricks were useful. Some MIDI programming stuff and some massaging of the instrument can really get it from something that is a little more awkward and herky-jerky and robotic to something that sounds pretty natural and pretty authentic. Thanks so much for checking out this tutorial. Again, my name is Dave Bode, bringing you this tutorial exclusively for audio.tutsplus.com, and we'll see you around. Thanks for watching.